Who is top of the food chain in the Florida Everglades? Dear Scary Stories NYC. In my young adulthood, I lived in natural areas much of the time. This was the 1970s when it was still a lot easier to get away with doing something like that. Or probably I should say that the 1970s was the time when it started to become harder and harder to live completely free inside the boundaries of these United States. For an almost 2-year period, I spent 28 days out of every 30 in the Florida Everglades, living either with a small team or else entirely alone. During that time, I witnessed and nearly got beaned by a skunk ape, and I'm going to tell you about that. In the year when I turned 60, far more recently, I went back to the Everglades with my son. There we both found ourselves confronted with a sharply changed ecosystem, wherein the skunk apes seemed to have become replaced by a trio of nocturnal hunters: the alligator, the dogman, and a recently introduced invasive species, the Burmese python. I personally watched part of a battle to the death between a dogman and an alligator, and on a different occasion, I witnessed a dogman fending off a python that had to have been 20 feet long or longer. I guess I'll start off with the alligator story, which happened in 2015, then go back to the 1970s, and finish up in 2015 again with the most recent sighting that my son and I made, involving the dogman and the Burmese python. Hollywood has made bank for generations creating fiction about lost worlds of impenetrable jungle where primitive and ancient species still rule. Well, a real-life lost world exists right here in the United States. And no, I'm not referring to those dinosaurs in Washington, D.C. I'm referring to a vast jungle taking up a good portion of southern Florida that is generally referred to colloquially as the Everglades. When people use that word, they may be referring to the entire region or one of several distinct national or state parks and wildlife preserves. If someone from prehistoric times were scouting out a new home for himself, he could do worse than to search inside the Everglades. The northwest corner of the region is taken up by the Big Cypress National Preserve. The northeast is the Everglades and Francis St. Taylor Wildlife Management Area. The southern tip of Florida, the nearly endless wild area southwest of Miami, is largely comprised of Everglades National Park. That's where my son and I witnessed an altercation between an alligator and an upright walking canid. Now, if you go south that far in Florida and you're in Everglades National Park, you'll discover that it's a lot of swampland, rivers, and tiny islands. Sometimes the islands get wet and it all just seems like a bunch of quicksand. On the night in question, we were camped out on a tiny little patch of very dry land surrounded by mud and water in all directions. My son, who we can call Rick, and I watched an alligator walk out right in front of us, about 30 feet away from our campfire. It seemed to have come from some water on our left and was heading towards some water past the trees on our right. We heard it splash into the water and presumably swim away, but we didn't feel any better about it. We put out our campfire and climbed into our tent, zipping it up tight to prevent anything from crawling inside with us. If you find it easy to get to sleep at night, try sleeping out where alligators, big cats, and big snakes all roam around free. That'll give you a nice case of insomnia, right quick. I was just dozing off when Rick and I both heard the unmistakable roar of a bull alligator. It was coming from the direction we had seen that big old gator walk off to. What could be getting something as big as that old boy upset? I told Rick we didn't need to know the answer to that question, which he found a disappointing answer. My son Rick is in his late 40s, but he still thinks he's a teenager. He thinks he's invincible and eternal. He felt that if we didn't go investigate what the alligator was roaring about, then there was no reason for us to be camping out there in the first place. We, according to him, were on a voyage of discovery like Captain Kirk. We were there to encounter strange new life forms, to boldly go where no man has gone before. Plus, it would be a chance for us to check out our new night vision goggles that he had bought for us. I tell you, those goggles really lit the night up, and that only made it even more terrifying for me. I'm not sure I really wanted to know what was there in the dark. I don't know why, but my legs felt weak as we walked around the tiny island and discovered that we were alone. Passing through the trees to the shoreline, we could see the alligator agitated in a way I've never seen one of them get before. It was making these hissing and roaring sounds at something in the water. Rick was already moving to a different spot to get a better view, and so I followed him. What was in the water was some sort of canine with upright ears on top of its head. I really could only make out the dog's head at that point. Its body was submerged as it swam. The fur was dark and wet, possibly black or dark gray, possibly dark brown. The dog was making threatening sounds as well, but very quiet ones that we couldn't hear from further away. He was somehow splashing water toward the shore to annoy the alligator, who seemed absolutely riveted to every movement of that large, dark, wet canine. The alligator made a running charge toward the water, and I thought it was about to slide in and swim toward the big canine's throat. The dog surprised the reptile, however, by making a big splash and heading up, out of the water, toward the shore. The gator tried to pull back, but too late. He ended up in a most awkward and vulnerable position, neither able to attack nor retreat. In one quick moment, water foamed and flew in all directions as the dog rose up, bringing the gator up with him. As the water subsided, I was surprised to see both creatures up on their hind legs, like an alligator man and a dog man. The upright canine slipped his front legs around the neck of the alligator, and with a sudden snapping motion, there was only one living creature left on that shoreline. The canine allowed the lizard to fall from his hold, but maintained his upright posture, observing what was left of his opponent. I stood there, in the dark, transfixed, watching a very tall dog stand there, dripping, waiting for him to drop back down to all fours. Which he never did. He stepped past the fallen gator and walked up onto the island, still on his hind legs. Getting a bit inland, I watched it shake some of the water out of its fur, then disappear into the trees on that island. I turned around, went back to the tent, and refused to come out again that night. I don't know what Rick did. We had a kind of philosophical parting of the ways over that, but we were to have another, even more remarkable Dogman sighting before we left the Everglades. Rick had been urging me to return to the Everglades for years and bring him with me. He always loved my story of the skunk ape and wanted to see the creature for himself. I personally wonder if the skunk ape even still lives in that region. It may have been starved out by the Burmese python. Here's my story of seeing the skunk ape way back in the 1970s. I was in the Everglades walking along a narrow body of water when I witnessed something darkly colored on the opposite shoreline. We both seemed to have spotted each other around the same time, and we were both spooked. To me, I thought I was seeing a chimpanzee. It was about as tall as I was, and I was an inch and a half under 6 feet. It stood up tall like a human. It wasn't slouched at all, and it was a little shorter than 6 feet. It bared its teeth at me and began pounding the ground in front of it. I decided to retreat away from the body of water. There was a small woods I was planning on walking into, hoping that would satisfy the territorial chimp or whatever it was. As I was maybe 8 or 9 feet away from entering the woods, a small boulder or large stone about the size of my skull, but probably a lot heavier, whizzed past my ear over my shoulder and landed a foot or two in front of me. I turned around, and the skunk ape was still displaying his teeth to me, looking extremely unhappy. Well, I was unhappy too. That barely missed clocking me in the back of my skull. That stone could have killed me. I glared back at that creepy old ape, and in reaction, he looked around for another rock to throw at me. I took the hint and ran into those woods. Out of sight, out of mind. When he couldn't see me anymore, the skunk ape quickly forgot all about me. So that was the entirety of my skunk ape encounter, and I never ran into any of those creatures ever again. Since then, I've looked at photos of chimps and they do not look like what I saw. The hair is different, the face is different. I'm not sure what I saw that night, but it didn't look supernatural. It looked like something perfectly normal that belonged there in the Florida jungle. If and when they ever do figure out what the skunk ape is or was. I bet it'll turn out to be closely related to some other current ape species. I had all sorts of unproven and untested theories for years afterward about the skunk ape possibly being one of the apex predators of Florida. Rick grew up hearing my theories, and that brings me back to the 2014-2015 era when the two of us returned to the Everglades to try to get a second look at the skunk ape. I never did see that creature again, but as you already know, Rick and I had two separate experiences where we had to deal with the Dogman. Now I'll tell you about the second of the two. Way back in 2014-2015, my son and I were living the life of free men, off the grid, down in Florida, in and around the Everglades. I told you about how I saw the skunk ape and saw the Dogman battle the alligator that time, but my most Florida moment of all came when I saw a strangling fight between the Dogman and a Burmese python, aka the dangerous noodle. If you don't know what a Burmese python is, the Burmese python is happy to hear that. You see, this plain brown snake, which can grow to be over 20 feet long and hundreds of pounds, doesn't like to draw attention to itself. It prefers to hide away underneath or behind things, waiting its chance to leap out lightning quick and attack its prey unsuspecting. When they're young, these python eat mice, then rats. As they grow, they learn to feast on rabbits, swallowing them whole. Then raccoons become their target. Imagine what kind of a snake could swallow a raccoon in one bite. The reptile then graduates to coyotes, goats, mountain lions, and even wolves. There have been recorded instances when the Burmese python has attempted to swallow an adult deer and even an alligator. There are those who will state as an unequivocal fact that the Burmese python, an invasive species, is at the top of the food chain in Florida. It not only succeeds when battling other predators like alligators, but it gets to their sources of food more efficiently than they do. There are only so many rabbits in Florida. Since the introduction of the Burmese python, that number's dropped down below near extinction levels. But while the python has made life tougher for many other predators in the Everglades, it's possible that it has opened up an ecological niche for the North American upright walking canid. Although, as I stated earlier, the Burmese python does occasionally take down large prey, it doesn't generally. What if the Dogman generally does pursue the larger game? Then rather than having his resources threatened by the python's presence, he might be prospering, or even replacing other species on the food chain. Before Rick and I left for the Everglades, I read an article about a wooden walkway being built at treetop level in Switzerland. Senda del Dragoon is what it's called, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. The same night I read the article, I awoke after 3 a.m. to see that a lighted passageway appeared outside my second-story bedroom window. Walking through the window and looking out, I saw the white walkway leading into a superhighway of brightly lit pathways, all at treetop level. It was like the Senda del Dragoon in Switzerland, but these passageways were incredibly brilliant in terms of their illumination. I walked out of my bedroom and onto the walkway, which instantly began moving once my feet touched it. It was like a moving sidewalk in an airport. I could see the perforated lines in the walkway that I was standing on. I could feel the sturdiness of construction. At first, the brightness of the passageway was reassuring and countered my fear of heights. But after some time, I wished that I could see the trees better. Instantly, the bridge itself dimmed and the trees became clearly visible, surrounding me, beneath, and all around. Once the bridges were made less visible, the entire neighborhood came into focus. I saw what appeared to be a canine-headed beast-man lurking in the shadows just off the passageways, right up there at the same level in the trees as I was, so I turned directly around and went back home. None of this seemed at all like a dream, but when I told my wife about it in the morning, she laughed at me. It took me days to accept her verdict that it had to have been a dream, but deep down inside, I felt as though I had actually lived through this experience. The winding, coiling, moving walkway showed me the Dogman, and then also protected me from him. My son Rick took it as a sign that I was ready to head out to the Everglades to see what nature and the fates would decide to let us see. I remember we were rowing down a narrow waterway, looking for a place to set up camp for the evening. I was feeling faint, which I have to admit I did nearly every time something dangerous was about to happen for those entire 2 years with my son. I would get scared before anything even happened in those days. We were rowing past narrow strips of land on either side of us, and we hadn't noticed anything interesting yet, either in terms of nice campsites or in terms of scary monsters and super creeps. But when I looked up and saw a moving, segmented sidewalk, I knew it was time to stop the boat and change direction. It wasn't actually a moving sidewalk. It was the underside of a very wide and extremely long snake, and it was winding its way past the strip of dry land to our right and into the lagoon beyond. We pulled the boat up onto the shore, and keeping to social distancing rules, we kept way more than 6 feet behind that giant snake. It wound its way over and under tree branches, affording itself a bird's eye view of the forest floor beneath it. Hiding ourselves behind some trees, Rick and I watched the snake drop and heard the big, deep kerplunk sound as it fell into the water and out of sight. Creating a bigger splash by turning around suddenly was a dog-headed hairy monster creature not unlike the one we had seen previously. At this point, I had dropped to the ground behind my tree for a while and allowed myself to weep and to shake violently. I needed to go ahead and get it out of my system, and then calm down about it. I just couldn't believe it was happening all over again. I mean, I was deathly afraid of the Burmese python, but I was abnormally terrified by the presence of the Dogman. My son Rick thinks this is the funniest part of the story, but I don't think there's anything funny at all about admitting that you're afraid of the Dogman. Dogman is bad news. Dogman can end your life. Dogman can drive you crazy. Dogman comes from nightmares, but sometimes we're forced to see him when we're awake, too. I'm not ashamed that I fell apart for a minute when I knew I was going to have to see that Dogman again. You don't know how you would react until it happens to you personally. Part of the rest of this I saw with my own eyes, and other parts of it were explained to me later by my son Rick, who was not as nervous in the situation as I was. Apparently, the snake swam directly at the Dogman under the water, and it got intercepted as it was about to bite the werewolf-type creature in a particularly vulnerable location. You might say the python was using below-the-belt tactics in this fight. The Dogman lifted the snake's head above the water, attempting to strangle it with both his hands. While he did this, the immense snake wrapped itself several times around the Dogman's chest. Now they were each strangling the other one, and both struggling for air. The Dogman staggered up onto the beach, unwrapping the snake from his midsection. He attempted to fling the snake away repeatedly, but sometimes it would hold on to the upright canine and pull itself back, while other times it would just use its reptile strength to tense up and refuse to allow its 400 or 500 pound form from being moved more than an inch or two in any direction. As the Dogman wrestled with the 18 or 20 foot long python, a young alligator saw the Dogman's leg as a potential meal. It moved out of the brush, quickly locking its dinosaur jaws around the upright canine's ankle. That Dogman howled in a way I've never heard any kind of animal moan since. Completely fed up, the Dogman pounded on the alligator, causing it to loosen its grip. With one hand grabbing the young gator's tail, the Dogman whipped him across the water, not at all paying attention to where he was throwing it. It slammed into the trees above us, causing a kind of wooden avalanche. Rick and I ran for the boat and rowed out of there. This time, his eyes were as teary as mine. You can't know what we felt like unless you've narrowly avoided being decapitated by a flying alligator the way we were. So, I apologize that I can't tell you who won the fight between the Dogman and the Burmese python. The fact that the winner is up in the air is in itself frightening. Where that python comes from, it hibernates a good part of the year. In Florida, though, it can kill and eat 365 days a year, just causing itself to grow larger and larger and more dangerous and larger. The very fact that we have to wonder if it could defeat a Dogman illustrates how deadly some invasive species can be under certain circumstances. So you tell me, is the Dogman at the top of the Everglades food chain? Is it the gator, the Burmese python, the mountain lion, the skunk ape, some other creature we haven't mentioned here? Please leave a comment below and you tell us, who is top of the Everglades food chain? We like Michelle, she's really swell. There's never a hitch when it's Michelle Rich. Please join us in thanking Michelle Rich for making this episode possible. In return, she gets to see our weekly Sunday secret uncensored Dogman stories, far too wild to ever run on this channel. Here's our spokesdog, Henry Lee Dogman, to explain it all in greater detail. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.